The milk spread across the dusty wooden floor of the general store like a white river, and the young woman's sobs filled the afternoon air as Harrison Hart pushed through the door looking for supplies, not expecting to find such a pitiful scene unfolding before him on that sweltering June day in 1878. Harrison had ridden into North Platte, Nebraska just that morning, his horse tired from the long journey from Wyoming Territory, where he had been working a cattle drive for the past 3 months. The town was bustling with activity, wagons rolling through the main street, people shouting greetings to one another, but the moment he stepped into Miller's general store, all that noise faded away. There she was, kneeling on the floor, her pale blue dress soaking up the spilled milk, her shoulders shaking with each sob that escaped her lips. "Miss, are you all right?" Harrison asked, removing his dusty hat and approaching carefully. He was a tall man of 26 years, weathered by sun and hard work, with kind brown eyes that had seen their share of hardship but never lost their warmth. The woman looked up, and Harrison felt something shift in his chest. She was beautiful despite the tears streaming down her face, with honey-colored hair falling loose from its pins and green eyes rimmed red from crying. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old. "I am sorry," she hiccuped, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "I am being foolish. It is just milk." "Does not seem like just milk to you," Harrison observed gently, setting his hat on a nearby barrel. "Mind if I help clean this up?" "You should not have to do that," she protested. But Harrison was already grabbing a mop from the corner where old Tom Miller kept his cleaning supplies. "Neither should you be doing it alone while crying your heart out," Harrison replied, his voice soft but certain. He began mopping up the milk with practiced efficiency, having cleaned more than his share of messes in bunkhouses and camps over the years. "I am Harrison Hart, but most folks call me Harris." "Hannah Henley," she said quietly, finally rising to her feet and brushing off her skirt. "And I suppose I look quite ridiculous, weeping over spilled milk like the saying warns against." Harrison glanced up at her and noticed the way her hands were trembling, the way she held herself like someone trying desperately to keep from falling apart. This was not about milk at all, he realized. This was about something much deeper, and the milk was just the final drop that made the bucket overflow. "My mama used to say that sometimes the smallest things break us because we are already cracked from all the big things," Harrison said, wringing out the mop into a bucket. "Want to talk about what really has you crying?" Hannah hesitated, studying this stranger who had walked into her disaster with such calm kindness. There was something in his eyes that made her feel safe, something genuine in his weathered face that suggested he understood suffering. "My father died 2 months ago," she began, her voice cracking. "He ran a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town, just a small operation, but it was ours. My mother passed when I was 16, so it was just father and me for the past 6 years. Now it is just me, and I am trying to keep the ranch running, but everything is falling apart. The hands quit because I cannot pay them properly. The cattle are getting sick. The bank is threatening to foreclose. And this morning, the last of my dairy cows broke through a fence I could not afford to repair properly, and she ran off. I spent 3 hours tracking her down in this heat, finally got her home and milked her, thinking at least I could sell the milk to Tom Miller for a few dollars. And then I tripped over my own clumsy feet coming through the door." The words tumbled out like a confession, and fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "I am sorry. You did not ask for my life story. You asked a simple question, and I am dumping everything on a stranger." Harrison finished mopping and set the mop aside, turning to face her fully. "Sometimes strangers are easier to talk to than friends. No judgment, no history, just honest listening." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief, offering it to her. "And for what it is worth, you do not sound clumsy or foolish. You sound tired and overwhelmed, and those are two very different things." Hannah took the handkerchief and wiped her eyes, surprised by the gentleness in this cowboy's voice. Most men she knew would have either ignored her tears completely or been made so uncomfortable they would have fled. But Harrison stood there, solid as an oak tree, his presence somehow calming. "Thank you," she said, meaning it for more than just the handkerchief. "Tell you what," Harrison said, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "I just finished a long drive and I have money in my pocket and nothing but time ahead of me. I was planning to rest up here in North Platte for a spell before moving on. What if I came out to your ranch and took a look around? Maybe I could help patch things up a bit, at least buy you some time with the bank." "I could not possibly accept that," Hannah protested, though hope flickered in her eyes. "I have no way to pay you." "Did not ask for payment," Harrison replied with a small smile. "Call it an investment in good karma. My mama always said to help when you can, because you never know when you will need helping yourself." "Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman," Hannah said softly. "She was," Harrison agreed, his expression growing distant for a moment. "Lost her to cholera when I was 19. Father followed her 6 months later, could not live without her. So I understand a bit about losing folks and feeling alone." The connection between them felt almost tangible in that moment, two souls who had known loss recognizing something familiar in each other. Hannah found herself nodding before she even realized she had decided. "All right," she said. "If you truly mean it, I would be grateful for the help. But I insist on providing meals and a place to sleep at least. We have a bunkhouse that is empty now." "That seems fair," Harrison agreed. He looked around the store and noticed old Tom Miller watching from behind the counter with obvious curiosity. "Tom, you got a problem with me cleaning up this mess?" "Not a bit, Harris," Tom said, using the nickname easily. He was a portly man in his 60s with a kind face. "And Hannah, I am sorry about the milk. I know you needed that money." Hannah bit her lip, and Harrison saw the worry cross her face again. Without thinking too hard about it, he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out $2 silver, setting them on the counter. "Tom, put that toward whatever Miss Hannah here owes you or needs to buy. Consider it payment for letting me use your mop." "Harris, no," Hannah started, but Harrison held up his hand. "Already done," he said simply. "Now, you have any other errands in town, or can we head out to your ranch? I would like to see what we are working with while there is still good daylight." Hannah looked like she wanted to argue further, but the relief in her eyes won out over her pride. "I have a wagon just outside. I was supposed to pick up some grain, but without the money from the milk, I cannot afford it right now." Tom Miller cleared his throat. "Hannah, your father was a good customer for 20 years. I can spot you the grain until your next payment. Harris's money will cover part of it and we will work out the rest." "Thank you, Tom," Hannah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you both." An hour later, Harrison was riding his horse alongside Hannah's wagon as they made their way out of North Platte toward her ranch. The Nebraska prairie stretched out around them, golden grasses waving in the hot breeze, the Platte River visible in the distance like a silver ribbon cutting through the landscape. The sun beat down mercilessly, but Harrison was used to it after years of working cattle drives. "Tell me about your ranch," Harrison said as they rode. "Your father run beef cattle?" "Mostly," Hannah replied, managing the wagon horses with capable hands. "We had about 200 head at our peak, but we are down to maybe 60 now. Some died over the hard winter, and I had to sell some to pay debts after father passed. We also kept a small dairy operation, about 10 cows, but that is down to 3 now. Father used to grow some corn and wheat too, but I could not manage the planting alone this year. Harrison listened carefully, his mind already working through possibilities. 60 head is still workable. You got decent grazing land. We have about 300 acres, Hannah said. There is a good creek that runs through the property, fresh water year-round. The land is good, Harris. That is what makes this so hard. If I could just get through this rough patch, I know the ranch could thrive again. But everything seems to be happening at once. When is the bank wanting payment? Hannah's hands tightened on the reins. End of August. They gave me 3 months after Father died, said they were being generous. I need $200 and I have maybe 30 saved up. Harrison whistled low. That is a tight spot. I know, Hannah said quietly. I have been trying to come up with solutions. I thought about selling more cattle, but prices are low right now, and I would have to sell so many that I would not have enough left to rebuild. I thought about taking in laundry or sewing from town, but I cannot keep up with the ranch work and add more besides. I even thought about just letting the bank take it and trying to find work in town, but every time I think about losing the land my parents worked so hard for, I feel sick. The anguish in her voice cut through Harrison like a knife. He had been wandering for years since his parents died, taking work where he could find it, never putting down roots because nothing felt like home anymore. But he remembered what it was like to have a place that mattered, land that meant something beyond just dirt and grass. We will figure something out, Harrison said, surprised by his own conviction. He had known this woman for less than 2 hours, but something in him had already decided that he was going to help her save her ranch, whatever it took. Hannah turned to look at him, and the gratitude in her eyes made his chest tighten. Why are you doing this? You do not even know me. Harrison considered the question, trying to find words for the feeling that had gripped him the moment he saw her crying over that spilled milk. Sometimes you just know when something is right, he finally said, and helping you feels right. The ranch came into view over the next rise, and Harrison assessed it with a practiced eye. The house was a modest single-story structure built of wood, painted white at some point but now faded and peeling. The barn was larger, showing signs of good construction but also neglect, with a few boards missing from the siding and the door hanging slightly crooked. There were several outbuildings, including what looked like a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and the bunkhouse Hannah had mentioned. Fencing was visible in the distance, and Harrison could see cattle grazing in the fields beyond. It was the kind of place that could be beautiful with some work, the kind of place that had good bones but needed someone to care for it. Harrison felt an unexpected pull in his chest, a longing for something he had not let himself want in years. It is not much to look at right now, Hannah said, a defensive note creeping into her voice. It is a good piece of land, Harrison said honestly. I can see the potential. Your father built something solid here. They pulled up to the barn, and Harrison dismounted, helping Hannah down from the wagon before she could protest. His hands spanned her waist easily, and when her feet touched the ground she looked up at him, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. Harrison felt it too, that spark of awareness, but he stepped back respectfully, clearing his throat. Let me help you unload this grain, then you can show me around properly, he said. They worked together in comfortable silence, carrying the heavy sacks of grain into the barn. Harrison noted the organization despite the disrepair, the way everything had a place even if that place was falling apart. Hannah's father had clearly been a methodical man, and Hannah had maintained his systems. All right, Hannah said, brushing dust from her skirt. Let me give you the full tour, such as it is. She showed him everything, not hiding the problems but not dwelling on them either. The chicken coop needed a new roof. The bunkhouse was sound but needed cleaning since it had been empty for 2 months. The main house was tidy, but showed signs of deferred maintenance. The cattle looked healthy enough, but the fences were a disaster, patched and repatched with whatever materials Hannah could scavenge. "The biggest issue is the south fence," Hannah explained as they walked the property in the late afternoon sun. "It borders the riverside property, and their cattle keep breaking through into my grazing land. I have tried to repair it, but I do not have enough good timber, and what I patch with scraps just breaks again." "Who owns Riverside?" Harrison asked. Hannah's expression darkened. "A man named Frank Garrison. He bought the property about a year ago, some rich businessman from Omaha looking to invest in ranching. He has been trying to buy my land ever since Father got sick, making offers that were insultingly low. Father refused every time, said he would rather die than sell to a vulture like Garrison. After Father passed, Garrison came to the funeral and made another offer before we had even finished filling the grave." Anger flared in Harrison's chest. "What kind of man does that?" "The kind who does not care about anything but money," Hannah said bitterly. "He knows I am struggling, and he is counting on me failing so he can swoop in and buy the land from the bank for even less than he offered me. I heard him talking to the banker in town last month, laughing about how he would have my land by harvest time." "We will make sure that does not happen," Harrison said firmly. The "we" slipped out naturally, as if he had already made some unspoken commitment. By the time they finished the tour, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Hannah led Harrison to the bunkhouse, which was dusty but solid. "I will get this cleaned up for you," Hannah said, looking embarrassed by the state of it. "I have slept in far worse," Harrison assured her. "I will clean it myself. You have enough to do." "At least let me bring you some supper," Hannah insisted. "I have stew left from yesterday. It is not fancy, but it is filling." "That sounds perfect," Harrison said with a smile. An hour later, Hannah returned with a pot of stew, fresh bread, and a jar of cool water from the well. Harrison had swept out the bunkhouse and claimed one of the 4 narrow beds, spreading his bedroll over the thin mattress. "This is wonderful," Harrison said after the first bite of stew. "You are a fine cook." "My mother taught me," Hannah said, sitting on the edge of another bed while he ate. "She said a ranch wife needed to know how to make a good meal from whatever was on hand. This stew is mostly garden vegetables and a little bit of rabbit I caught in a snare yesterday." "You are running this whole place by yourself," Harrison observed. "That is remarkable, Hannah." "You should be proud." Hannah ducked her head, clearly unused to compliments. "I am just doing what I have to do. There is no one else." "Still remarkable," Harrison maintained. He finished the stew and set the bowl aside. "Here is what I am thinking for tomorrow. I will start by assessing all the fencing and making a list of what materials we need for proper repairs. Then I will check over your cattle more thoroughly, make sure none of them are developing problems. In the afternoon, I can work on the chicken coop roof if you have some spare shingles somewhere." "I do not have money for fencing materials," Hannah reminded him quietly. "There is timber on your land," Harrison said. "I saw a good stand of trees down by the creek. We can cut what we need and split rails. It will be more work than buying lumber, but it will cost nothing but time and sweat." Hope flickered across Hannah's face. That could work. Father always meant to thin those trees anyway, said they were getting too thick. "Then it is settled," Harrison said. "We start tomorrow." Hannah stood to leave, picking up the empty bowl. At the doorway she paused and turned back. "Harris?" "Yes, thank you. I know I have said it already, but I mean it. You walking into that store today feels like an answer to a prayer I was too tired to even speak." Harrison felt warmth spread through his chest. "Get some rest, Hannah. Tomorrow is a new day and we have work to do." After she left, Harrison lay back on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. He should have been thinking about the work ahead, making plans and calculations. Instead, his mind kept returning to the way Hannah's green eyes had looked in the lamplight, the way her voice softened when she spoke about her parents, the strength it must have taken to keep fighting even when everything seemed lost. He had not planned on staying in North Platte. He had not planned on getting involved with anyone's problems. But sometimes life did not follow plans, and Harrison was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, walking into that general store at the exact right moment had been fate. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of hard work and growing connection. Harrison rose with the sun each morning and worked until dark, tackling the endless list of repairs and improvements the ranch needed. He cut timber and split rails, rebuilding the south fence into something that would actually keep cattle where they belonged. He patched the barn's siding and fixed the crooked door. He re-roofed the chicken coop and built a new gate for the main corral. Hannah worked alongside him whenever her own chores allowed, and Harrison found himself looking forward to those hours when they labored together. She was strong and capable, not afraid of hard work, but she also made him laugh with her dry observations about the chickens' personalities and the stubborn old milk cow who had started all this. "I swear Bessie broke through that fence on purpose," Hannah said one afternoon as they worked together to string new wire. "She knew I was at my breaking point, and she decided to push me right over the edge." "You think a cow has that kind of strategic thinking?" Harrison asked, amused. "That cow is smarter than most people I know," Hannah replied seriously. "She waits until I am looking right at her, and then she does something destructive while maintaining eye contact. It is psychological warfare." Harrison laughed, the sound coming from deep in his chest. "Maybe you should recruit her to help with Garrison. Send her over to his place to wreak havoc." "Do not think I have not considered it," Hannah said with a grin that transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. These moments of levity were balanced by deeper conversations that happened in the quiet hours of evening, when the work was done, and they would sit on the porch of the main house, drinking cold water from the well and watching the stars come out. Hannah told him about her childhood, about her mother who had loved reading and had taught Hannah from books she treasured. She spoke about her father, who had been stern but loving, who had dreamed of building something lasting for future generations. Harrison shared his own stories too, things he had not spoken about in years. He told her about growing up in Colorado, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the happiness of his early years before disease took his parents. He spoke about the loneliness of drifting, taking work on different ranches and cattle drives, never belonging anywhere. "Did you never want to settle down?" Hannah asked one evening. "Find your own place." "I did once," Harrison admitted, "but after my folks died, nothing felt right. Every place I tried to light seemed wrong somehow, like I was forcing something that was not meant to be. So I kept moving, figuring I would know the right place when I found it." "And have you?" Hannah asked softly. "Found it, I mean." Harrison looked at her in the deepening twilight, at the way the last rays of sun caught in her hair, at the open honesty in her face. "I am starting to think I might have," he said quietly. The air between them grew charged with something unspoken, and Hannah's breath caught. But before either of them could say more, the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. 4 riders came into view, and Harrison stood instinctively, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. Hannah stood too, her expression hardening. "That is Garrison," she said quietly. The lead rider was a man in his 40s, well dressed in expensive riding clothes that seemed out of place on the dusty prairie. He was handsome in a polished way, with dark hair going gray at the temples and cold blue eyes. The three men with him had the look of hired guns, hard-faced and dangerous. "Miss Henley," Garrison said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy, "I see you have hired some help finally. What do you want, Garrison?" Hannah asked, her voice steady despite the tension Harrison could see in her shoulders. "Just being neighborly," Garrison said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Wanted to check on my fence line, make sure there had been no more issues with your cattle damaging my property." "My cattle have not touched your property," Hannah said firmly. "In fact, it has been your cattle breaking through into my grazing land." "Interesting interpretation," Garrison said dismissively. His eyes shifted to Harrison, assessing him. "And who might you be?" "Harrison Hart," Harrison said evenly, not offering his hand. "I am working for Miss Henley." "Really?" Garrison's smile widened. "I was not aware Miss Henley had the funds to hire proper help, unless you are working for something other than wages." The implication in his tone made Harrison's jaw tighten with anger, but before he could respond, Hannah stepped forward. "My business arrangements are none of your concern," she said coldly. "You have checked your fence line and it is intact, as you can see from the new construction. Now I will thank you to leave my property." Garrison's pleasant expression slipped, showing the calculating hardness beneath. "The bank deadline is coming up fast, Miss Henley. You might want to reconsider my offer. I am willing to pay fair market value now, but once the bank takes over, I will be able to buy the land for a fraction of that." "I will not be selling," Hannah said firmly. "Not to you, not to anyone. This land was my father's and it will remain mine." "Pride is expensive," Garrison said, gathering his reins. "You will learn that soon enough. Good evening, Miss Henley." He nodded to his men and they turned to ride off, but not before one of them deliberately rode his horse through Hannah's vegetable garden, crushing tomato plants and bean poles. "Hey!" Harrison shouted, starting forward, but Hannah grabbed his arm. "Let them go," she said quietly. "It is not worth it." Harrison watched them ride away, fury burning in his chest. "He cannot do that. There are laws." "Laws require sheriffs who care to enforce them," Hannah said tiredly. "Sheriff Palmer is in Garrison's pocket. Besides, what am I going to do? Charge him with the crime of his hired man's horse stepping in the wrong place? He would just claim it was an accident." "This is not right," Harrison said, turning to her. "He is trying to intimidate you." "He has been trying to intimidate me since Father died," Hannah said. "This is nothing new. Come on, let us see what can be salvaged from the garden." They spent the next hour in the twilight, staking up trampled plants and salvaging what they could. Harrison seethed the whole time, hating the helplessness he felt. He had dealt with plenty of hard men in his time, but they had usually been straightforward in their methods. Garrison's sneaking, legal maneuvering felt like a different kind of fight, one Harrison was not sure how to win. That night, he lay awake in the bunkhouse, thinking. The fence repairs were nearly done, and the ranch was in better shape than it had been in months, but none of that would matter if Hannah lost it to the bank. He had some money saved from the cattle drive, maybe $70, but that still left 100 short of what was needed. An idea began forming in his mind, risky but possible. There was a big cattle auction in Omaha in 3 weeks, right before Hannah's bank deadline. If they gathered her cattle and drove them to Omaha instead of selling locally, they might get better prices. It would be hard work, just the two of them managing 60 head, but it was doable. And if they could get even slightly better prices than the local market, it might make the difference. The next morning, Harrison presented the idea to Hannah over breakfast in the ranch house kitchen. "Omaha," Hannah said, her eyes widening. "That is over 300 miles, Harris. It would take at least 2 weeks to drive the cattle there, maybe more." "I know," Harrison said. but I have done trail drives before, and 60 head is manageable. We would need to hire maybe 1 or 2 more hands just to help with the drive itself, but the prices in Omaha are significantly better than what you can get locally. I have seen cattle go for 30 to 40% more at the city auctions. Hannah was silent, clearly calculating. Even if we got 40% more, and even if we sold all 60 head, I am not sure it would be enough. It would be close, Harrison said. And I have $70 saved that I can add to it. Harris, no, Hannah protested. You have already done so much. You have worked for 3 weeks without pay. You have spent your own money on supplies. I cannot take your savings too. You are not taking it, Harrison said firmly. I am investing it. In this ranch, in this plan, in you. The last words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than their simple sound. Hannah looked at him, her green eyes searching his face. Why? She asked softly. Why would you do all this for me? Harrison reached across the table and took her hand, the first time he had deliberately touched her since helping her down from the wagon that first day. Her hand was rough with calluses from work, but it felt perfect in his. I think you know why, he said quietly. These past 3 weeks, working beside you, talking with you, getting to know you, it has meant something to me. You mean something to me. And I know it is fast, and I know we have not spoken about it, but I care about you, Hannah. I care about this ranch because you care about it. I want to help you save it because seeing you lose something you love would break my heart. Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, but they were different from the tears he had first seen in the general store. These were tears of emotion, of connection, of hope. I care about you too, she whispered. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was too soon, that you would leave when the work was done, that I should not let myself feel this way. But I do. I care about you so much it frightens me. Harrison stood and pulled her gently to her feet, still holding her hand. Then let us try this plan. Let us save your ranch together. And then, when it is safe and secure, we can figure out what this is between us. No pressure, no rush, just honest feeling. Together, Hannah repeated, and then she smiled, that brilliant transforming smile that made Harrison's heart skip. All right, let us do it. Let us take these cattle to Omaha and save this ranch. They spent the next week preparing for the drive. Hannah knew a couple of young ranch hands from a neighboring property who agreed to help for modest wages and the promise of good meals. Jack Morrison was 21, lanky and eager, while his brother Thomas was 19, quieter but steady. They were good boys from a good family, and they were willing to work hard. Harrison and the Morrison brothers gathered the cattle while Hannah prepared supplies for the journey. They would need food for 2 weeks on the trail, cooking equipment, bedrolls, everything required to live outside while moving 60 head of cattle across Nebraska. The night before they were set to leave, Hannah and Harrison stood together looking over the ranch in the moonlight. I am scared, Hannah admitted quietly. What if something goes wrong? What if we lose cattle on the drive? What if the prices are not as good as we hope? What if we do all this and it still is not enough? Then we will figure out another plan, Harrison said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that felt both natural and momentous. But I believe this will work. I believe in you, in this ranch, in us. Hannah leaned into him, fitting against his side like she was meant to be there. I believe in you too. That is what scares me most, I think. I have not let myself believe in anything for so long, and now here you are, and I cannot help it. Harrison turned to face her fully, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Hannah Henley, when we get back from Omaha with enough money to save this ranch, I am going to court you properly. I am going to take you to dinner in town, and I am going to ask permission to come calling, and I am going to do everything the right way. But right now, before we leave on this drive, I need you to know something. What? Hannah breathed. I am falling in love with you, Harrison said simply. Maybe I have been since the moment I saw you crying over that spilled milk. I know it is fast, and I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and spending every day with you feels like coming home after years of wandering. I needed you to know that before we set out tomorrow. Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I am falling in love with you too, Harris. You make me laugh when I thought I would never laugh again. You make me hope when everything seemed hopeless. You walked into my worst moment and turned it into the beginning of something wonderful. I love you. Harrison cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sweet under the Nebraska stars. It was a kiss full of promise, of possibility, of a future they were both beginning to believe in. The cattle drive began at dawn, and it was every bit as challenging as Harrison had anticipated. 60 head was not a huge number, but with only 4 people managing them, every day required constant vigilance. They moved slowly, letting the cattle graze as they went to keep them healthy and maintain their weight for sale. Harrison rode point most days, with Hannah beside him, while Jack and Thomas worked the flanks and rear. They moved across the Nebraska prairie, following established trails when they could find them, forging their own path when necessary. The weather was unpredictable, with occasional summer thunderstorms that sent the cattle into nervous shuffling and required everyone to work double time to keep them calm and together. But there were beautiful moments too. Evenings around the campfire when they would share stories and jokes. Mornings when the sun rose over the endless grass and painted everything gold. Quiet moments when Harrison and Hannah would ride side by side, not needing to speak, just being together. On the 5th night, a storm rolled in with unusual fury, lightning cracking across the sky and thunder booming loud enough to shake the ground. The cattle grew agitated, and despite everyone's best efforts, a dozen head broke away in panic, running off into the darkness. I will go after them, Harrison shouted over the rain, already spurring his horse. Not alone, Hannah called back. Jack Thomas, keep the main herd together. Harris and I will bring back the strays. They rode hard through the storm, chasing the panicked cattle across the dark prairie. It was dangerous work, the ground slick with rain and visibility nearly zero. But Harrison and Hannah worked together with an unspoken coordination that came from trust, from knowing each other's capabilities, from something deeper than mere partnership. It took 3 hours, but they managed to find all 12 cattle and drive them back to the main herd. By the time they returned, they were both soaked to the bone and shivering, but the cattle were safe. You two all right? Thomas called as they approached the camp. Fine, Harrison called back. Just wet. How is the rest of the herd? Settled down once the storm passed, Jack reported. You should get dry and warm. We will take watch. Hannah and Harrison dismounted, and Hannah immediately started shivering harder, her teeth chattering. Harrison pulled her close, sharing body heat. Come on, he said. Let us get you into dry clothes before you catch your death. He walked her to the small tent they had set up for privacy, giving her space to change while he stood guard outside. When she emerged in dry clothes, still shivering, Harrison had built up the fire and heated water for coffee. Drink this, he said, pressing the warm tin cup into her hands. Hannah sipped gratefully, color slowly returning to her face. Thank you for not letting me go after them alone. And thank you for coming with me instead of insisting you go alone while I stayed safe. We are partners, Harrison said simply. That means we face dangers together, not me protecting you like you are fragile. You proved tonight you are anything but fragile. Hannah smiled at him over the rim of her cup. I like being your partner. Good, Harrison said, his own smile matching hers, "because I plan on keeping you as my partner for a very long time." The rest of the drive passed without major incident, and 13 days after leaving the ranch, they arrived in Omaha. The city was overwhelming after weeks on the open prairie, full of noise and people and buildings that seemed impossibly tall. But Harrison navigated them through to the stockyards with confidence, having been there before. The auction was the next morning, and Harrison spent the evening talking to other ranchers and buyers, gauging prices and interest. What he learned made his heart sink. "Prices are down," he told Hannah that night at the modest hotel where they had taken rooms. "There was a big drive from Texas last week that flooded the market. I am hearing numbers that are barely better than what you could have gotten locally." Hannah's face fell. "So we did all this for nothing?" "I did not say that," Harrison replied, taking her hands. "I said the auction prices are down, but I talked to a man named Henry Fulton who runs a meat packing operation here in the city. He is looking for a reliable supplier from western Nebraska, someone who can provide quality beef cattle on a regular basis. He is willing to pay premium prices for the right partnership." "But I only have 60 head," Hannah said, "and most of those we need to sell tomorrow to pay the bank." "I know," Harrison said, "but here is what I am thinking. We sell 40 head at the auction tomorrow. Between the sale price and my $70, that should give you just enough to pay the bank with maybe a little left over. We keep the best 20 head and drive them back to the ranch. Then we use those 20 to start rebuilding your herd, and I talked to Fulton about giving you credit to buy more cattle. He would take a percentage of future sales, but it would give you the capital to expand." Hannah listened intently, her quick mind working through the implications. "That could work. If I had a guaranteed buyer at good prices, I could go to the bank for an operating loan, use that to buy more cattle and really expand the operation." "Exactly," Harrison said. "It would not be easy and it would take time to build up, but it would give you a real future, not just barely scraping by." "Us," Hannah corrected softly. "It would give us a real future. That is what you meant, is not it? You are not planning to leave after we save the ranch." Harrison pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. "I am not planning to leave ever if you will have me. I meant what I said, Hannah. I love you. I want to build a life with you on that ranch. I want to marry you if you will say yes. I know we have not known each other long, but when something is right, it is right." "Yes," Hannah said without hesitation, looking up at him with shining eyes. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Harris. You walked into my life when I was at my lowest point, and you gave me hope and laughter and love. You made me believe in tomorrow again. Of course I will marry you." Harrison kissed her, deep and passionate, pouring all his love and commitment into the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hannah laughed with pure joy. "We should probably tell Jack and Thomas that their boss is getting married," she said. "Tomorrow," Harrison said. "Tonight, let us just be happy together." The auction the next morning was tense, but the cattle sold for decent prices, and when combined with Harrison's savings, they had exactly $215, enough to pay the bank with a small cushion. Hannah cried when Harrison counted out the money, tears of relief and joy and disbelief that they had actually done it. They met with Henry Fulton that afternoon and worked out the details of an ongoing supply arrangement. Fulton was a shrewd businessman but fair, and he seemed genuinely pleased to have found a reliable source for quality cattle. He agreed to provide credit for Hannah to purchase 50 additional head, with payment coming from future sales. "You have yourself a deal, Miss Henley," Fulton said, shaking her hand. Then he looked at Harrison. "And congratulations on your engagement. Hart here could not stop talking about you yesterday." Normally, I would be annoyed by a man wasting my time with love talk, but he spoke so highly of your business sense and work ethic that I figured any woman who impressed him that much was worth partnering with. Hannah blushed but smiled proudly. Thank you, Mr. Fulton. You will not regret this partnership. The journey back to North Platte was slower than the drive to Omaha, hampered by a late summer heat wave and the need to be careful with the 20 head they were bringing back. But there was a lightness to the trip that had not been there before. The weight of impending disaster lifted from Hannah's shoulders. They talked about the future as they rode, making plans. They would marry in the fall, after the bank was paid and the ranch was secure. They would expand the cattle operation gradually, building it back to what it had been and then beyond. They would repair the house and make it truly theirs, a home for the family they hoped to build together. I want children, Hannah said one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. At least 3 or 4. I was lonely as an only child after Mother died, and I want our home to be full of noise and laughter. I want that too, Harrison said, his arm around her shoulders. A house full of kids running around, learning to ride and work the ranch. Teaching them about the land and hard work and doing right by people. You will be a wonderful father, Hannah said softly. You have such a good heart, Harris. And you will be an amazing mother, Harrison replied. Strong and loving and wise. When they finally arrived back at the ranch, it was late August, just days before Hannah's bank deadline. They settled the cattle and cleaned up from the journey, and the next morning they rode into North Platte together, with $200 in a leather pouch and triumph in their hearts. The banker, a thin, nervous man named Albert Peterson, looked almost disappointed when they walked into his office. Miss Henley, he said, clearly surprised. I was not expecting to see you. I am here to pay my debt, Hannah said firmly, setting the leather pouch on his desk. $200, as agreed. I believe that settles my father's loan in full. Peterson counted the money slowly, as if hoping to find it short, but the amount was exact. He sighed and pulled out a ledger, making careful notations. The debt is settled, he confirmed reluctantly. I will draw up the paperwork showing the lien is released. Thank you, Hannah said coolly. And Mr. Peterson, you can tell Frank Garrison that the Henley Ranch is not for sale, not now and not ever. Peterson flushed, but said nothing, and Harrison and Hannah walked out of the bank with their heads high, legally secure in their ownership of the land that meant everything to them. They were married 6 weeks later, in early October when the prairie had turned gold and the air had cooled to a pleasant crispness. The wedding was small, held at the ranch with just a few friends and neighbors in attendance. Tom Miller from the general store came, along with the Morrison brothers and their family. Even Henry Fulton made the trip from Omaha, bringing a fine set of cooking pots as a wedding gift. Hannah wore a simple blue dress that brought out the green in her eyes, and she carried wildflowers picked from the prairie. Harrison wore his best shirt and pants, his dark hair neatly combed, his face alight with happiness. The circuit preacher spoke about love and commitment and building a life together, and when Harrison kissed his bride, everyone cheered. The celebration afterward was full of food and music and dancing. Someone had brought a fiddle, and couples twirled under the open sky. Harrison and Hannah danced together, her head on his shoulder, his arms holding her close, both of them marveling at how far they had come from that day in the general store. Happy, Harrison murmured against her hair. Happier than I ever thought possible, Hannah replied. You saved me, Harris. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, Harrison corrected gently. I was lost before I found you, wandering with no purpose, no home. You gave me all of that. You gave me everything. As night fell and the stars came out, the guests began to depart, leaving Harris and Hannah alone on their ranch, their home, the beginning of their forever. They stood together on the porch where they had shared so many conversations, looking out over the land that was now legally and completely theirs. "I have something for you," Harrison said, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. Hannah opened it carefully to find a beautiful leather-bound journal and a fine pen. "You told me once that your mother loved reading and books," Harrison said. "I thought maybe you would like to write our story, the story of the ranch and our family, so someday our children and grandchildren can know how it all began." Hannah traced the leather cover with her fingers, tears gathering in her eyes. "It is perfect, thank you." She paused, then smiled up at him. "Should I start with he found her weeping over spilled milk?" Harrison laughed, the sound warm and rich in the cool night air. "That seems like a good beginning." "And what should be the ending?" Hannah asked playfully. "There is no ending," Harrison said, pulling her into his arms. "Just more beginning, day after day, year after year for the rest of our lives." The years that followed proved Harrison right. They were not easy years, but they were good ones, full of hard work and steady progress. True to their agreement with Henry Fulton, they expanded the cattle operation gradually, building their herd back to over 200 head and maintaining a reputation for quality that made their beef sought after in Omaha and beyond. The ranch prospered, and with prosperity came improvements. They repainted the house, added 2 rooms for the family they hoped to grow, replaced all the fencing with solid construction that would last decades. They hired back steady hands to help with the work, good men who were paid fair wages and treated with respect. In the spring of 1880, Hannah gave birth to their first child, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Henry Thomas Hart, after Harrison's father and Hannah's. "He is perfect," Harrison whispered, holding his tiny son with a mixture of awe and terror. "How is something so small so perfect?" "Because he is ours," Hannah said, exhausted but glowing with joy. "Because he is made of love." Henry was followed by a daughter 2 years later, Emily Rose, who had Hannah's honey hair and Harrison's stubborn determination. Then came another boy, James William, who was quiet and thoughtful from birth. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with children's laughter and the constant motion of a busy family. Harrison proved to be the wonderful father Hannah had predicted, patient and playful, but also teaching his children the value of hard work and honest dealing. He taught Henry to ride when the boy was barely 4, sitting him on the gentlest mare and leading her around the corral while Henry shrieked with delight. Hannah balanced motherhood with her role in running the ranch, her sharp mind for business making her invaluable in negotiations with buyers and suppliers. She was respected in North Platte as a savvy businesswoman, and many people came to her for advice about their own operations. The shadow of Frank Garrison hung over them for a few more years, with the man making occasional attempts to create problems for the Henley Ranch, but each attempt failed. His own operation never prospered the way he had hoped, and eventually he sold out and returned to Omaha, defeated by the very woman he had tried to ruin through it all. The love between Harrison and Hannah only deepened. They made it a point to continue their evening tradition of sitting together on the porch after the children were asleep, talking about their days and their dreams, maintaining the connection that had formed over spilled milk and desperate hope. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Hannah with a trip to Omaha, just the 2 of them, leaving the children with the Morrison brothers and their wives for a few days. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate at nice restaurants, and attended a theater performance that left Hannah breathless with wonder. "This is incredible," she said, watching the actors on stage with wide eyes. I have never seen anything like it." "You deserve incredible things," Harrison said, taking her hand. "You deserve the world." "I have the world," Hannah replied, looking at him instead of the stage. "I have you and our children and our ranch. What more could I possibly want?" But the trip was not just about entertainment. Harrison had arranged a meeting with some investors in Omaha who were interested in the beef industry. With Hannah's approval, they worked out a deal that would provide capital for further expansion, turning their successful ranch into something that could eventually be passed down as a legacy to their children. "You are building an empire," one of the investors said admiringly. "Most women would leave this kind of business to their husbands." "My wife is not most women," Harrison said proudly. "And this ranch is as much hers as it is mine. More, actually, since it was her family's land to begin with. I am just the lucky man who gets to help her run it." The investor looked between them, seeing the obvious partnership and mutual respect, and smiled. "You two are going to go far." He was right. By their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, the ranch had grown to over 500 acres and 300 head of cattle. They employed 6 full-time hands and several part-time workers during busy seasons. The house had been expanded again to accommodate their growing family, which now included 4 children with a 5th on the way. Hannah sat on the porch one evening in early summer, her hand resting on her rounded belly, watching Harrison teach 8-year-old Henry how to rope a post, while 6-year-old Emily cheered them on, and 4-year-old James played with a wooden horse Harrison had carved for him. Their youngest, 2-year-old Margaret, slept peacefully in Hannah's lap, her tiny hand curled around her mother's finger. The scene was so perfect, so completely fulfilling, that Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. Tom Miller, now in his 70s and officially retired but still visiting friends regularly, came walking up the path, moving slowly but still spry. "Evening, Hannah," he called. "Thought I would stop by and see how the finest ranch family in Nebraska is doing." "Come sit, Tom," Hannah said warmly. "We are doing wonderfully, as you can see." Tom settled into the rocking chair Harrison had built for him years ago, kept on their porch specifically for his visits. He watched the children playing for a moment, then turned to Hannah with a smile. "You know, I think about that day you came into my store with that bucket of milk," he said. "The day you met Harris. You were crying so hard I thought you might never stop, and that milk was spreading across my floor like a disaster. I wondered if you would make it through, honestly. You seemed so broken." "I was broken," Hannah said quietly. "Completely shattered. I could not see any way forward. And then in walks this dusty cowboy looking for supplies," Tom continued. "And instead of walking away from your mess, he grabbed my mop and started cleaning it up." "You know what I thought when I saw that?" "What?" Hannah asked. "I thought, there is a man who sees problems as opportunities to help, not reasons to run. And I thought, if he can make her laugh while she is crying over spilled milk, he might just be able to help her with the bigger problems too." "Did he make me laugh that day?" Hannah asked, trying to remember through the haze of tears and stress. "I remember him being kind, but I do not remember laughing." "After he cleaned up the milk," Tom said. "He said something about how at least you did not have to worry about a cow breaking in to drink it off the floor, and you laughed. Just a small laugh, but it was there. First sign of light in all that darkness." Hannah smiled at the memory, now clearer. She had laughed, a watery sound mixed with tears, but it had been real. Harrison had given her that laughter in her darkest moment, hope when everything seemed lost. As if summoned by the thought of him, Harrison finished the roping lesson and walked over to the porch, lifting James into his arms despite the boy's protests that he was too big to be carried. "You are never too big for your papa to carry you," Harrison said firmly, settling onto the porch swing next to Hannah. "Tom, good to see you." "Good to see you too, Harris," Tom replied. "I was just telling Hannah about the day you two met." "The spilled milk," Harrison said, his eyes meeting Hannah's with warmth and memory. "Best accident that ever happened." "It was not an accident," Hannah said with mock seriousness. "I told you Bessie planned the whole thing. She knew I needed help, so she broke through the fence, led me on a 3-hour chase, and then made sure I was so exhausted I would trip carrying the milk into town. Also, I would be in that exact store at that exact moment when a certain cowboy walked in." "A cow matchmaker," Harrison said, playing along. "Is that what you are claiming?" "Absolutely," Hannah maintained. "Bessie is a genius, and no one can convince me otherwise." Harrison laughed and leaned over to kiss her forehead. "Well, in that case, I owe Bessie everything." "Where is that brilliant cow? I should go thank her." "She died 3 years ago, and you know it," Hannah said, swatting his arm playfully. "But her daughter is in the barn, equally brilliant, I am sure." "I will thank her too, just to be safe," Harrison said. Tom watched their easy banter with a satisfied smile. "You two are good together. Built something real here, something lasting." "We built it together," Hannah said, looking around at her children, her home, her husband, her life. "Everything good in my life came from that terrible day when everything seemed to be falling apart. Funny how that works." "Not so funny," Harrison said softly. "Just life. Sometimes you have to break before you can heal stronger. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. And sometimes," Hannah added, "you just have to cry over spilled milk and wait for the right person to walk through the door with a mop and a kind word." The baby in Hannah's womb kicked strongly, and she gasped, her hand moving to the spot. Harrison's hand joined hers immediately, his face lighting up at the movement. "Strong one," he said. "Like his parents," Hannah replied. Then she paused. "Or her parents. We shall see." Little Margaret stirred in Hannah's lap, yawning and blinking up at her mother with sleepy eyes. Hannah cuddled her close, breathing in the sweet smell of her baby girl, marveling as she always did at the miracle of these children, this family, this life. As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, the Hart family sat together on their porch, surrounded by love and laughter and the quiet satisfaction of a hard day's work done well. The cattle lowed in the distance, the horses nickered in the barn, and somewhere a coyote called to the rising moon. Inside the house, on a shelf in the parlor, sat a leather journal filled with Hannah's careful handwriting, the story of their family written in her own words. She had started it on their wedding night, as Harrison had suggested, beginning with the words. He found her weeping over spilled milk. The cowboy cleaned it and made her laugh, and from that moment, everything changed. The journal was not finished, and it never would be, because their story kept unfolding day by day, year by year. New pages were added regularly, documenting births and birthdays, first steps and first words, cattle drives and business deals, quiet moments and grand adventures. But if someone had asked either Harrison or Hannah what the most important words in that journal were, they would have pointed to that first sentence. Because everything else, all the joy and success and love that filled their lives, had grown from that single moment of connection when a crying woman and a kind cowboy had met over a bucket of spilled milk. The fifth baby, born in early 1889, was another boy, whom they named Thomas Albert Hart after Tom Miller and Hannah's father. Tom cried when they told him, honored beyond words to have this bright-eyed baby carry his name into the next generation. The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life. Henry grew into a responsible young man, taking on more duties around the ranch and showing his father's steady temperament and his mother's head for business. Emily was spirited and fearless, able to outride most of the ranch hands by the time she was 12. James was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to cattle, but still doing his share of the work without complaint. Margaret was sweet and nurturing, always caring for injured animals or helping her mother tend to the younger children. And Thomas, the baby, was pure mischief and joy, keeping everyone on their toes. By 1895, 17 years after that fateful meeting in the general store, the Hart Ranch was one of the most successful operations in western Nebraska. But more important than the success was the happiness that radiated from every corner of the property. Visitors always commented on how the children seemed so content, how Hannah and Harrison still looked at each other like newlyweds, how the whole place just felt like home. One evening in late summer, Hannah and Harrison sat on their porch swing, watching their children play in the yard. Henry, now 17, was teaching his younger siblings a complicated rope trick. Emily, at 15, was showing off her riding skills on the young mare her father had given her for her birthday. James, 13, sat under a tree reading but looking up frequently to watch his siblings with an affectionate smile. Margaret, 11, was organizing an elaborate game of make-believe for Thomas, who at 6 was willing to play along with anything his beloved older sister suggested. "We did good," Hannah said softly, her head resting on Harrison's shoulder. "We did very good," Harrison agreed, his arm around her waist. At 44, he had some gray in his hair and lines around his eyes from years of sun and smiling, but he was still strong and healthy, still working the ranch every day alongside his hands and his growing sons. Hannah, at 41, was more beautiful to him than she had been at 22. The years had added grace to her beauty, confidence to her bearing. She ran the business side of the ranch with shrewd intelligence, managed a household of 7 with patient efficiency, and still made time to sit with him every evening and talk about their day. "Do you ever think about that day we met?" Hannah asked. "Really think about it, I mean, not just the stories we tell the children." "All the time," Harrison admitted. "I think about walking into that store looking for supplies and finding you instead. I think about how close I came to just walking back out because I did not want to intrude on your private moment. I think about what my life would be if I had made that choice, and it makes me shudder." "I think about the milk spreading across the floor," Hannah said. "How it seemed like the end of the world in that moment, the final disaster in a long string of disasters. I could not see past it to anything good. I certainly could not imagine that the solution to all my problems would walk through the door and start mopping." Harrison chuckled. "I was not the solution to all your problems. You did most of the solving yourself. I just helped a little." "You helped a lot," Hannah corrected. "But more than that, you gave me hope. You showed me I did not have to face everything alone. You taught me to laugh again when I thought laughter was gone forever." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children as the light faded from the sky. Finally, Harrison spoke again. "I never told you this, but the night before I walked into that general store, I had a dream about my mother. She was telling me that my wandering days were almost over, that I was about to find what I had been looking for without knowing I was searching. When I woke up, I did not understand what she meant, but the moment I saw you crying over that spilled milk, something in my soul just knew, this was it, you were it, the end of wandering, the beginning of home." Hannah turned to look at him, tears shining in her eyes. "You never told me that." "Seemed too strange to say out loud," Harrison admitted. "But it is true. I knew from that very first moment that you were going to change my life, though I had no idea how much or how beautifully." "I love you," Hannah said, the words as heartfelt as they had been 17 years ago when she first spoke them. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. And I love you, Harrison replied, kissing her softly. My beautiful, strong, incredible wife. The woman who taught me what it means to build a life instead of just surviving one. As darkness fell completely and the children began to drift inside for supper, Hannah and Harrison remained on the porch for a few minutes longer, holding each other close, grateful for everything they had built together from the ruins of spilled milk and tears. The story of their love would continue for many more years. They would see their children grow and marry and have children of their own. They would expand the ranch even further, creating a legacy that would last for generations. They would face challenges and hardships, as all lives do, but they would face them together, with the strength that came from true partnership and deep love. And sometimes, when the grandchildren would visit and ask how Grandma and Grandpa met, Harrison and Hannah would exchange a smile full of shared history and private joy, and they would tell the story once again. It all started with spilled milk, Harrison would begin. I was crying like my heart would break, Hannah would continue. And I walked in with a mop and made a terrible joke about cows, Harrison would add. And I laughed despite myself, Hannah would finish. And that was the beginning of everything. The grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, amazed that something as simple as spilled milk could lead to a love story as grand as their grandparents. But Hannah and Harrison knew the truth. It was not the spilled milk that mattered. It was not even the meeting itself. It was what came after. The choice to help instead of walk away. The decision to hope instead of despair. The willingness to open their hearts to the possibility of love when both had known such loss. The commitment to build something together, day by day, moment by moment, challenge by challenge. That was the real story. The spilled milk was just the beginning, the spark that started a fire that would burn bright and warm for the rest of their lives. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything. On a warm spring day in 1920, Harrison Hart passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68, surrounded by his wife, his children, and many of his grandchildren. His life had been long and full, rich with love and purpose, and the satisfaction of work well done. Hannah held his hand as he took his last breath, her tears falling freely but her heart at peace. They had been married for 42 years, together for 42 years, and a few months counting from that day in the general store. It had been a good life, a beautiful life, exactly the kind of life she had stopped believing in before Harrison walked through that door. She lived for another 5 years after Harrison's death, spending her time surrounded by family, watching the ranch continue to thrive under Henry's capable management, delighting in great-grandchildren who carried forward the legacy she and Harrison had built. On her last day, lying in the bed she had shared with Harrison for so many years, Hannah asked for the leather journal he had given her on their wedding night. With trembling hands, she opened to the last page and picked up a pen. "It all started with spilled milk," she wrote in her shaky handwriting. "And it ended with a life so full of love and joy that even in my final moments, I can only feel grateful. Thank you, my darling Harris, for stopping to help a crying woman. Thank you for seeing past the tears to the person beneath. Thank you for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me, for giving me children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who will carry our love forward into the future. I am coming to find you now, my love. Wait for me on the other side. We have more living to do together, you and I, in whatever comes next. Until then and beyond, I am forever yours. Hannah." She closed the journal and handed it to Emily, now a woman in her 50s, who sat beside her bed. "Keep this," Hannah whispered. "Make sure the children know. Make sure they understand that love is worth fighting for, that hope can come from the darkest moments, and that sometimes the worst day of your life can turn into the beginning of the best years. "We will remember, Mama," Emily promised, her voice choked with tears. "We will make sure everyone remembers." Hannah smiled and closed her eyes, and with her children and grandchildren surrounding her with love, she slipped peacefully away to join her beloved Harrison, wherever souls go when their earthly journey is done. The Hart Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, growing and changing with the times but never losing the essential character that Harrison and Hannah had built into its foundation. The house they had expanded and improved over the years was preserved and cherished, and in the parlor, in a place of honor, sat the leather journal that told their story. Descendants would take it down sometimes and raid the entries, marveling at the journey from spilled milk and despair to love and legacy. They would read about cattle drives and financial struggles, about children born and challenges overcome, about quiet moments on the porch and grand celebrations of anniversaries and achievements. But most of all, they would read about love. Deep, abiding, transformative love between two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had chosen, day after day for more than 4 decades, to keep choosing each other, keep building together, keep loving through whatever came. And somewhere, in whatever realm exists beyond this mortal life, Harrison and Hannah were together still, their love unbroken by death, their partnership continuing in eternity. Because some loves are simply too strong to be contained by a single lifetime, too powerful to be ended by something as mundane as mortality. Their story, which began with tears and spilled milk and a cowboy with a kind heart and a willingness to help, had become a legend in the family, told and retold to each new generation as an example of what love could be when it was built on foundation of friendship, respect, shared labor, and unshakable commitment. The spilled milk that had seemed like a disaster in the moment had been, in truth, the greatest blessing Hannah had ever received, because it had brought her Harrison, and Harrison had brought her everything else: love, family, purpose, joy, a life beyond her wildest dreams. And that, in the end, was the true moral of their story: that sometimes our worst moments are simply doorways to our best ones, that help can come from the most unexpected sources, that love can bloom in the space between tears and laughter, that a simple act of kindness can change the course of a life, or 2 lives, or generations of lives to come, all from spilled milk, a cowboy with a mop, and the willingness of 2 wounded souls to open their hearts to the possibility of something beautiful. The end.